tracked my calories very meticulously for a really long time. I think on and off for about 3 years, but I remember that there was one year where I literally tracked everything for an entire year, except for maybe cheat meals, which I had sometimes once a week, sometimes 0 times a week. And my family thought I was retarded or something. I always had to explain to everybody that, yeah, like I'm tracking and all that shit. And it was extremely irritating. There was no way to live. I remember this one occasion where I was at my dad's house and I was drinking orange juice or apple juice or something, and I was measuring it and typing that in. And then my stepmom came in and looked at me with a face of horror, like, you measured that too? And I was like, what do you mean? Of course, it has calories. And the worst thing about tracking your food is it takes away literally any freedom that you have. And so I knew that this is not going to be a good long-term strategy. And also, I saw so many people around me who weren't measuring anything and they made way better progress than me. And not just around me, but also eventually I started seeing a lot of lifters online as well who didn't measure anything, weren't on gear or something like that, but they still made really good progress. And I started thinking like, why the fuck am I even still doing this? But the problem is whenever you completely start freestyling your food, for some people it works really well because they eat exactly the amount that they should because their appetite is correct. For me personally, and I know for a lot of other people as well, it doesn't work at all because, you know, I'm the type of person who on some days I could probably eat like 5,000 calories, eat like 5-6 meals because I'm hungry. But on other days I can literally go for like 12 hours without eating and I don't even want to eat. And for that kind of person, just simply winging it is not going to work. But the thing is, nobody ever teaches you how to eat without tracking your calories, without measuring your food, but still make good progress. And so I had to figure that out myself. And personally, I think I did a pretty good job at it because I haven't used my food scale in an entire year. And in this 1 year, I made better progress in the gym than in the previous 3 pretty much. Even though in those 3 years, there was an entire year that I was measuring all the time, and there were some other periods as well where I was measuring. So here's how you can stop being a slave to the scale. The very first thing is I actually recommend you to try measuring for a while if you've never tried it before, because that way you will roughly learn what has what amount of protein and what has what amount of calories. So for an example, before measuring maybe you don't know a lot of stuff, but after measuring you know that if you eat peanuts they're gonna be a lot of calories but also a lot of protein. If you eat rice, that's gonna be a lot of carbs and pretty much nothing else. Now if you're already making good progress without measuring, you can completely skip this, but if you feel like your progress isn't that good but you don't want to measure your food forever, obviously, first I still recommend you to track your calories or macros for just a little while, maybe 1-2 months, maybe 3 months, and then you can start to try to eliminate the scale. Now, one thing that I will say is when you do this period, don't just always eat the same shit, okay? Eat a bunch of different foods everywhere, because the point is that you want to learn which foods have what nutrients and what amount of them. And if you always just eat the same shit but you measure it, you're going to learn that one thing really well, but about anything else you will have no idea at all. But now let's get to actually leaving the scale. The very first thing that I will say is meals are going to be your best friend. From now on, you're not going to quantify your foods as calories, rather you're going to quantify them as meals, and also the meals themselves are going to be small, medium, large. You should know roughly how big a meal is, and you should know how many meals you need each day to go towards your goals, what kind of meals those are, and how big they are. For example, I know that on most days I have 3 meals. The very first one is usually oatmeal, it's a pretty big meal. Then the second one is lunch, that's also a pretty big meal. It's usually some side dish, meat and some vegetables. Then I have a third meal, that's usually some sort of sandwich. That's not as big as the other ones, it's a little bit smaller, it's more like medium sized I would say. And then I will also have some fruit and some juice here and there as a snack, but I don't really consider that as a meal, but I know that I am eating it. And so technically I could say all of those together are one very small meal as well. In terms of how many meals you should have, I feel like that is completely personal preference. I would recommend at least 3, but you can also have 6 if you like that. I think that's a little bit insane, but it really depends on how much you need to eat and whether you like to eat more often but smaller meals, or whether you like to eat less often but bigger meals. Now, it's not completely necessary, but it's a good idea to have some meals that are constant. So for an example, for me, my breakfast is the same thing all the time. It's oatmeal with protein and raisins. For other meals, you can have a template. For an example, for lunch, I have the template of some side dish, some meat and some vegetables. I think that would be the same template for most people when it comes to lunch. And the meal doesn't have to be the same all the time. You can swap out the ingredients for other ones. So for example, you can eat chicken, you can eat pork, you can eat beef, you can eat lamb, you can eat fish. One thing I would say here is some meats are fattier than others, so you will have a calorie difference if you choose, I don't know, chicken breast instead of beef. But when it comes to meat, I don't really care about it. I don't really count after it at all because, I mean, it's not that big of a difference, honestly. When it comes to a side dish, rice, pasta, they're kind of the same. If you would eat, for an example, sweet potatoes instead of rice though, you have to pay attention because you will need to eat much more sweet potatoes than rice to get the same amount of carbs. Now, you don't have to be super psychotic about counting after that. I'm just saying that is a thing. And for an example, if you eat sweet potatoes instead of rice and you eat the same amount, don't be surprised if you haven't gained any weight. Maybe you even lost some, because sweet potatoes barely have any calories, while rice have a lot more, obviously. And then the vegetables, I don't care about those at all. You can eat whatever vegetables you want. Most of them don't even have literally like any calories, so it doesn't matter. Another thing that I found really useful just to roughly know the amount of food that I'm eating is to use measurements other than the scale. Because I mean, the scale is such a hassle, but when it comes to something like 1 scoop of protein, 1 slice of bread, 1 glass of orange juice. I mean, I don't know how much a fucking glass is, but I know that 1 glass is 1 glass, 2 glasses or 2 glasses, so it helps me to roughly quantify things. For example, I have this little scoop or cup, or I don't know what you would call this. I use this usually to measure my rice and my oats, and I really like it. You can also eye a lot of stuff. So for an example, I know roughly how much peanut butter I put on my peanut butter and jelly sandwich when I make one each time. And this goes for usually the meals that you make for yourself. But what about, for example, one night you go out and eat at a restaurant with friends, or you, I don't know, go to your parents' house or something and they give you some food. You should roughly know how big the meal was. You don't have to think about like, yeah, this was this much calories and that was that much. You just look at it and you're like, it's a medium-sized meal. So then you go home and maybe you would have had a medium-sized meal after that anyways, but now you're not going to have it because you already had that somewhere else. Or if you had a medium-sized meal somewhere and you were supposed to have a big-sized meal afterwards when you get home, you just eat a small meal when you get home. Now, your second best friend is going to be a scale, but not the food scale, but rather the body weight scale. I recommend you to measure yourself every single morning when you can. If you're sleeping at your parents' house or at a hotel, you're traveling, whatever, it doesn't matter. But when you're at home every single morning, when you can, do measure yourself. Obviously before eating and drinking anything, because otherwise it's not going to be accurate. And you can just put that into Apple Health, which will show you your weekly and monthly average, and you can always look at that and see whether you need to eat a little bit more or less. Now, I wouldn't worry very much about daily measurements because they don't really matter that much. Your weight fluctuates a lot, but something I would say is I know roughly how much I should weigh. And so let's say that for this month I know that my monthly average should be around 197. That means that if one day I wake up, step on the scale and I'm 198, okay, I'm not gonna eat an extra meal, I'm just going to eat whatever I eat normally. If I step on the scale and I'm 195, I'm gonna be like, okay, today I'm going to eat 4 meals instead of 3 and get in a little bit of extra. If I'm 197, perfectly fine, I'm just gonna eat as much as I would normally eat. And so with that, I can kind of determine how much food I need. Now, something I like to highlight is this will take time. The more you do it, the better you will get at it. And click here to watch my last video.